Hey, friends, welcome back to Read Through the Bible in a Year. We are flying through the gospel according to Matthew. Far too fast for my liking. There's too much in here. It's hard to say this because they're all so rich and wonderful, but I've always had a soft spot for Matthew for quite a long time. And the passage that I'm going to take a look at today is one that I memorized back in high school, and it served me well since. I want to ask the question as we kind of approach this for our thinking today: are some commandments more important than others? Are some things more important than others? We have tended to have a thing where we like to equalize things, in part because we have been hypocritical at times as people and sort of highlighted the things that other people are doing wrong and not ourselves, and we like to focus on the things that we're doing right because it makes us look better. And that's a problem, and hypocrisy is a big problem that Jesus is addressing actually in chapter 23 of Matthew. But in chapter 22, this is, again, foundational for discipleship. So hopefully you're already familiar with this, but I want to challenge you, excuse me, like I did yesterday, to that this, the first thing I'm going to talk about, the heart of it, is really something that you should have memorized. And I know some people have a hard time with memorization, but I think the reality is a lot of us like to make excuses because either it's hard or the reality is we just don't really want to take time to do it. Is probably the honest truth for more than, and I know for some it's harder. So I think I'm probably in the middle. It doesn't come incredibly easy to me, nor is it the hardest thing ever. But I want to tell you that one of the things that I do that doesn't necessarily a discipline of memorization, but if a scripture is important enough where I use it and I say it and I bring it into a conversation again and again and again and again, that you become so familiar with it that you almost have it memorized. So we're Matthew chapter 22, verses 37 through 40. And we'll take a look at that little nugget and then one other little one in chapter 23 here today. That's where we're going in these few minutes we have together. Let me read Matthew chapter 22. I'm going to start back in verse 34. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, and we're talking about the law here, we're meaning the Old Testament, first 5 books of the Bible, right? The Torah, that's what the word law means. An expert in the law tested him with this question: Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Now, maybe for us, if we're familiar with this passage, we know what it says, and it's an easier answer. But maybe for us, we would be tempted to say sometimes, well, they're all equally important. If God said them, right, they must all be of equal importance. But that's not what Jesus says. Jesus actually has no hesitation in answering this question. And then he'll circle back around to kind of round out the picture, I think, as well. And so he replies. Verse 37 now. Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. He's quoting here from Deuteronomy, I think it's chapter 6, in this, right, this foundational belief. And this is one of the things, it's interesting. One of the, I can't help but doing Bible study like methods here in these videos because I think it's so important. Whenever there's something in the Old Testament that we're reading, we should be asking the question: what if anything does Jesus do with this? What if anything do the New Testament writers do with this? Because some things are fulfilled in a way that you can't just read it on its own terms, ultimately, without thinking about the fulfillment. But other things like this, Jesus carries forward and quotes it. He doesn't say, you've heard it said, love the Lord your God, but I say to you, like we saw back in the Sermon on the Mount earlier in Matthew. He simply says the greatest commandment is this, and he quotes it. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. Okay? No hesitation, no ifs, ands, or buts, no whatever. But it's interesting that Jesus keeps going. He doesn't just mic drop and walk away. He keeps on talking. And the second, verse 39, is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's interesting. It's from a different place. The beloved book of Leviticus. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. Again, footnotes. If you have a Bible that doesn't have these references in it, let me know, because I'm kind of acting as if this is the commonplace, and I can't remember in other Bibles. I think most of them will have these references in there for fairly direct quotations. So he follows up. Here's the first, but I don't want to stop talking before I say the second. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind. It's Luke's account that adds strength, I believe. We'll see that when we get to it. And love your neighbor as yourself. Verse 40 completes the section. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So he's not saying that the other stuff doesn't matter. Doesn't say that at all. But he does say you can say what's first. There is something most important. There is something second most important. There's a whole bunch of other stuff. It doesn't go away, but it hangs on these foundational realities. And so it's most important, right? How much of the Bible do we know? Well, not as much as we would like. But can we know? Can we have memorized what's most important? Yes, we can. And it's right here. And we should. We should know this. This should roll off of our tongues. It should be in our hearts and in our minds. And I hope if you've tracked with me or you know me that you recognize that I don't, I'm very much not into like laying guilt trips or like heavy burdens on people. But there's some baseline things that if we don't have really ready to access, we're not going to be able to walk this thing out. And it's worth taking the time to do, even if it's a struggle, particularly with some really foundational stuff like this. Such good stuff. Such worth just continuing to think about. In chapter 23, this will be the last thing that I'll share. I'm not going to go through it in detail. Is the woes on the teachers of the law and the Pharisees. Pharisees, because the only way that we kind of access them is through Scripture for the most part, have gotten a bad rap. And there's been a lot of interesting writing from biblical scholars about Pharisees recently. An interesting question is this: of the different groups that were kind of going on in the time of Jesus, the different Jewish groups, of course, he was in amongst that community. The Sadducees, who was mostly the priestly type class, the Pharisees, these guys, teachers of the law, Essenes who withdrew, they're not in here that much, and the Zealots who were kind of taking up the sword to accomplish God's way, so they thought. Which of these groups is Jesus the most like? I think he's the most like the Pharisees, even though he really is hard on them. But like them, Jesus is very interested in knowing and following God's law for the everyday person in everyday life and applying it really, to those everyday matters of life that we've seen in the Sermon on the Mount, the discipleship. So maybe it's because they should have and could have done a lot better than they did, that he's so hard on them, because they were the popular teachers that were kind of out and about in the community, and the way that they taught was tended to be what was accepted and believed. And so Jesus is really hard when they don't get it right, and primarily in this case because of the sense of hypocrisy. Now, this comes late in Jesus' ministry here in Matthew's gospel. He doesn't come out of the gate with this, but he's lived with them. He's experienced their response to him, his teaching, etc., and it's not been good. And so in this chapter, Jesus kind of lets them have it. And he calls them hypocrites, a word that I understand kind of would be used for an actor in the in the ancient world, somebody who was pretending to be somebody else. So this is a big, really big, bold, thing for Jesus to say and for it to be recorded here in Matthew's gospel. Let me just read a little bit from this. Verse 23 of chapter 23. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin. I don't really like cumin. I like all those spices. They're good. Dill maybe, yeah, dill pickles. It's good, right? Mint tea is good. Cumin's good. If you don't have any cumin in your life, get that going. And I've never tithed any of my spices. So you give a tenth of your spices. What does that mean? That they're meticulous in their desire to want to follow the law. If it says give a tithe, let's give a tithe. Let's give a tithe of everything, right? But you have neglected the more important matters of the law. So here we have again the what did you say, Jed? Maybe the rest of us could try those spices if you tithe yours. I'll give some to you, bud. I got you. You have neglected the more important matters of the law. So here we have again, much like with Jesus being asked, what's the greatest commandment? No problem answering it. And Jesus says here, you've neglected the more important, the weightier matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. And again, he circles around and he says, you should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. So when you kind of check boxes of things that aren't central, but in the process of that, you're ignoring what's at the heart of God, it's hard to be right? It's hard to be on the right standing. And this, friends, is really the prophetic. If you turn, which we were just there reading through the Bible, and the prophets are so often concerned about the way people treat other people, particularly the vulnerable, the widows, the orphans, the foreigners dwelling among them. When they're not treated well, God's not that interested in the worship practices as far as going to the temple and offering this stuff and doing this and the tithe. God, if you bring this spice tithe, but you're neglecting the needs of the people in the community around you, you're a hypocrite, Jesus says, right? So it's important for us as followers of Jesus to keep the main thing. Again, all the things matter, just like all the law and the prophets hang on those two commands. There's a lot of things that matter, but there's some things that matter the most. And if we're not concerned about the things that matter the most, these other things aren't going to help us too much. All right. What do you have to say, Judd? Without neglecting the former, so the little things still important, they should just not overshadow. Yeah, I think that's overshadow the more important. I think that's similar to what I just said. So yeah, a lot for us to think about. And a lot here. Oh, let me end with this at the end of chapter 23, because this is one, and I'm gonna make a note card for this, because I never have tried to memorize this, but I basically do, just because I've thought about it so much. This, and I want you to note this. So I'm in chapter 23 now, verse 37. And that should be easy, because chapter 22, 37 is the statement about the greatest commandment. So there you go. 22:37, 23:37, if you like this. And this passage is so important to me. And it comes right, I think it's so interesting. It comes right on top of all of this extended woe to you, hypocrite. Into that, because we're like, wow, I guess Jesus really just hates these guys, right? Like Jesus just like, forget you guys. Nope. That's not it. Because look at this. Verse 37. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. Right? Rejection, violence towards God's representative so much. And this is tracking, back often through the Old Testament, the kind of latter parts of it, but also in their current moment with Jesus. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who killed, like God sent you prophets, God sent you me, who is God in human flesh, Jesus, right? So what's his response to that? What's Jesus's feeling towards them in their hypocrisy, in their violence? How I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. This motherly image, Jesus says, that's my heart. He says, my heart is to take your rebelliousness and your hypocrisy, whatever, because you're still people that I love. What I want to do is gather you in as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. And you were not willing. And you were not willing. And this is the moment that I think, is it Luke maybe's account that has Jesus weeping? That level of emotion. Jesus is not filled with hatred and anger. Primarily, he's filled with deep compassion and love and, sadness, brokenheartedness at his people's lack of willingness to respond to the kind of kingdom that he brings. And still he'll say, right, in Luke's account, as he's being killed, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Well, we'll think about that when we get to it along the way. Look, your house is left to you desolate. So things are gonna, and then in chapter 24 that I'm not gonna talk about today, talks about destruction of the temple and in this. So there's gonna be consequences. I'm not just talking about after sort of death consequences. We're talking about the destruction of the temple and in Jerusalem and all that. Like, it seems to me from the reading of this, like that's all Jesus is saying. This, it's your rebelliousness that's leading to all this. Just like it did in the first destruction of Solomon's temple, right? So a lot to wrestle with here. But again, what's most important, keeping first things first, keeping God's heart in mind always. So thanks, guys. I'll catch you later. Have a great day.